background, and action!
I see a red door and I want it into black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black.
You see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes. I wanna see a painted, painted black, black as night, black as gold.
Now let's knock this motherfucker out of the park!
Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, if not the greatest. His ability to convey complex human psychology on screen and translate literature on film is unparalleled.
To live is a monster, or to die is a good man.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
Some might make bigger movies. Some may make movies deeper and profound still, yet none can interpret reality as it truly is as Martin Scorsese. He can make you truly feel sorry for the most realistically deplorable characters and make you feel misplaced sense of anger for the good people. When we started watching cinema as teenagers, Martin Scorsese was the stalwart that everyone referred and recommended. Everyone recommended Taxi Driver and Goodfellas.
Look at this genius!
From pretentious film bros to people who love cinema for what it is, to true intellectuals to people who saw movies for memes. Everyone holds Martin Scorsese in high regard. We loved Martin Scorsese, but his work was so complex. We never understood why he was so great. We felt it, we saw the difference between good cinema and bad, but we never truly understood the trick of the magician, or if there was any trick at all. It is perhaps to no one's surprise that living is hard and life, even the easiest ones seen from afar, can grow tedious and painful. This often twists our views and we make ideologies that help us make sense of the world, and often what we convey in art is a biased, albeit unique perspective. Rarely is it met with sophistication and the care it needs. Cinema is the most complex form of art to create. Except maybe video games. It takes the effort of all existing fields of artistry and blend it into an experience. Every scene requires the right amount of sound, music, dialogue, lighting, camera position, production design, and an actor who can convey what the filmmaker envisions, yet not so restricted that the audience just monotonously follows. Martin Scorsese is to cinema what Dostoevsky and Tolstoy are to literature, yet he doesn't stand for any profound belief or secret meaning of life. Instead, Scorsese begs you to lend your eyes and ears and uncover what you will from his craft. It's all laid out for you. What exactly do we mean by this?
Yeah. Tootski.
Part 1. Taxi Driver. Let's take an example from one of Martin's greatest movies, Taxi Driver. The story is heavily inspired of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. In fact, Martin Scorsese would probably start a trend in arthouse cinema where a morally ambiguous male protagonist commits deplorable acts under a moral justification for the sake of finding purpose and getting lost within that. Yet, none have done justice to that trope as Martin Scorsese has when he pioneered it in Taxi Driver.
Loneliness has followed me my whole life, everywhere.
Consider for a moment that you are an outsider and do not know someone like Travis Bickle as shown by Martin Scorsese. Would you like such a person? If Travis's loneliness wasn't an indication already, most people do not like him. Would you like a man that takes a woman to a pornographic theater without her consent and then stalks her or threatens her or make a scene in her office? Probably not. When Dostoevsky wrote Raskolnikov, it was clear what kind of a person he was. His acts were justified to himself, but ultimately served his emotional needs only. He took a sense of superiority to mask his flaws. The message that Dostoevsky was going for was clear that Dostoevsky disliked the rise of rationality growing in his country and feared that such crude reliance on rationality will make man morally bankrupt. As man slowly starts growing a hubris, considers himself and his rationality above what's real, seeks no counsel and justifies his action with said rationality. Dostoevsky thus fell back on religious values and believed that one should love even their enemies and love even when it's naive, as that's better than growing a hubris in the name of justice, supported by feeble rationality and becoming corrupt. Dostoevsky often wrote the people he found deplorable to be more admirable in nature, and their ideas were often justified on the surface. This is the way Dostoevsky humanized his characters, and this is certainly the theme with Martin Scorsese as well, who humanized and made wild criminals seem more like people. It takes great courage to write and film people you do not agree with as human beings with their own admirable traits and finding great empathy in their cause.
Motherfucking mutt! You fucking piece of shit!
This is something that's shown in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov that definitely has its root in Better Call Saul and its twist on them with Jimmy and Chuck, where the rationalist fails to redeem himself, or True Detective, where the rationalist Rust Cole does redeem himself. But Martin Scorsese doesn't have any religious or spiritual grandstanding here. In fact, Travis's morality becomes further ambiguous as he kills a pedophile and a gang of criminals exploiting underage girls for money. Even though it is a series of murders and a brutal and violent one at that, the audience still isn't sure if Travis is evil. Many might argue that Travis did what he did to save Iris, but that's just one of the issues with not just a tiny fraction of it. Travis isn't a hero or a savior. He's looking for a purpose and fulfillment. He finds that in Betsy for a while, but then when she rejects and abandons him, perhaps rightfully so, he becomes more miserable and seeks out a more drastic and reckless course of action. There is no pain greater than the pain of existence, and that's certainly the case with Travis. Did the pimps deserve severe punishment? They did, and probably worse than that. But Travis could have saved Iris before he even started going out with Betsy. In the movie, we are constantly in Travis's head and seeing things through his eyes. He thinks the city is corrupt and full of vile human beings. Yet, Travis is one of such vile humans. He kills a gang of pimps to save Iris, but he also brings Betsy to a pornographic theater. He overly reliant on pornography out of banality and purposelessness, and he only starts changing on the base of spite. In Martin Scorsese's cameo in the movie, his character justifies his attempt to murder his wife and his racism on the account of her cheating with him. The man certainly has gruesome and vulgar notions in his head, and Travis too is disgusted by him. Yet, Travis picks a similar, arguably a more favorable path, partly because we know what kind of people Travis is killing and we know him as a character, yet one ending in bloodshed and death and his own catharsis. Travis could have called the police, yet he took matters in his own hands and traumatized Iris, who along with all the abuse she has already suffered at the hands of sport and others would have to live with the memory of violent bloodshed. Travis obviously has redeeming qualities, and some of that make him more sympathetic. What Martin Scorsese succeeds in is making a character more human, and he does it really well because he is not inhibited by issues that plague other writers, even some of the greatest, the need to enforce their vision upon the audience. This leads to characters slowly getting flanderized to fit that vision. Flanderization is the progressive exaggeration of a single trait or set of traits of a fictional character until it overtakes all other characterization. For example, if a character is shown to be primarily of low intelligence, then the subsequent storylines feature him as dumb and bumbling clerks, and his other traits are never fleshed out. Writers often do this out of schedule conflicts, lack of creativity, or to drive home their message by exaggerating the suitable character trait. Martin Scorsese of course has a vision, but one that's more liberating for the audience and one that allows him to grow and explore as an artist. Even characters such as Travis Bickle that by the end of the story come back to square one. There's a difference between Travis not growing as a character and a character that is flanderized. Travis refuses to seek professional help or solve his internal conflict in a healthy way, and this leads him to choosing reckless paths that often lead to sorrow and destruction. This solves nothing, and Travis is back to the mental prison he began with. Instead of confronting himself, he confronts the world and is left unsatisfied when things don't work out.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Hi, Mom. What do you think?
You look like a gangster.
Rags to riches. If you would only say you care.
Part 2. Goodfellas. Martin Scorsese was one of the first directors to use classic rock and art rock and music in his movies, and he used them to get inside his character's psyche. But there is arguably another reason why Martin Scorsese used this technique and pioneered it over time. Let's take a look at two of the greatest movies about the Italian mafia in the United States.
I believe in America. America has made my fortune.
Godfather and Goodfellas.
Don't ever take sides with anyone against the family again.
Never rat on your friends, and always keep your mouth shut.
Godfather is often incorrectly categorized, if that can be done with art at all, as a mafia flick, which when inspected further appears to be untrue. Goodfellas, however, is a mafia flick. So what's the difference between Goodfellas and Godfather? The Godfather is a Shakespearean tragedy, and it's the tragic tale of Michael Corleone,
You're unlucky.
an honorable and good man who slowly deviates from his principles and becomes something exceedingly sinister. The scenes of Godfather are often shot, designed, and blocked like a theatre drama with dark backgrounds and lights predominantly focusing on the characters on screen. Characters get into deep and poetic monologues, making the film fondly quotable. However, in Goodfellas, the scenes are lit in a way that's dissimilar to theatre's drama. As said before, Martin Scorsese uses rock music and eventually metal in his scenes to convey a powerful idea, and he does that to ground the movie in our reality. Godfather has a soundtrack that is iconic and unique to the story. Anytime someone hears Nino Rota speak softly, they immediately imagine the moors of Sicily. Michael dancing with Apollonia and subsequent grief that Michael suffers. But this is a feature unique to Godfather only, and what Martin Scorsese does so great is once again representing the psychology of his characters. There are soundtracks for Taxi Driver, Irishman, and The Departed soundtrack by Howard Shore is one of the best in any movie.
Your heart rate is jacked. Your hand?
Do you know who I am?
Steady. That's one thing I figured out about myself in prison. My hand does not shake. Ever.
And when the movie is strictly in a fictional world and is full of abstract ideas like Shutter Island, Scorsese doesn't rely on tracks from pop culture or rock, but Scorsese carefully picks and chooses when and where the tracks should be used. To portray a character's psyche and the after effects of their actions, he chooses songs from our own world so that the characters themselves can feel like they are from our own world. For example, in Goodfellas, during the Christmas party scene, the entire sequence has the song Layla by Derek and the Dominos playing in the background. the song gets softer and louder depending on the mood of the scene.
Didn't I say what was going on? Didn't I say not to go buy anything for a while? Yeah, got a fucking car. It's a wedding gift, Jimmy.
It plays at a moderate loudness, one you had expect in a party when the scene starts. You can still hear people talking, and as soon as the scene gets serious with Jimmy and the mobsters, he's scolding for buying expensive cars and coke.
What are you getting excited for? What am I getting excited about? Because you're gonna get us all fucking pinched, that's why. What are you, stupid? What's the matter with you? I apologize. What's the matter with you? Sorry. What the fuck is the matter with you?
The music fades out. Once the party ends and Jimmy goes home, we are shown some kids playing under a tunnel and no track is to be heard, and the scene is as silent as it gets, which acts perfectly as build up to the revelation that Ronnie and his wife have been killed, and as soon as the party starts, the piano outro of Layla starts playing again. Scorsese creates a one-to-one correspondence. The lyrical part of the song corresponds to a party. The fading of that song leads to something more serious, and silence while kids are playing implies a world separate from that of the wise guys. A world full of juvenile naivety and blissful ignorance. That is shattered now that the children have discovered almost every single deadly scene. The greed implied by the Cadillac, the lust that Ronnie had for a woman he maturely married, and the wrath, pride and envy of Jimmy. Just how Henry was corrupted decades ago by fantasizing a life with the Goodfellas.
That was it. No more letters from truant officers, no more letters from school, in fact no more letters from anybody.
In a few short sequences, Scorsese conveys everything he needs to and grounds the story in the world we live in. This technique is used by many works of media ever since. The Boys uses the song of Billy Joel and Rolling Stone. Quentin Tarantino uses songs from his childhood and teenage years to make the movie more nostalgic. And Christopher Nolan doesn't use tracks of the other artists at all to firmly ground his movies in imagination and pure fiction.
When I was your age, they would say we could become cops or criminals. Today, what I'm saying is this. When you're facing a loaded gun, what's the difference?
Part 3, The Departed, and the profundity of it all. What does it all mean? What does all the mental gymnastic entail? One might argue that Martin Scorsese says and conveys the same thing as any other person in his field, but with an approach that makes it harder to decipher. He very craftily uses music, camera, editing to entail the same message that mafia and crime is bad. Is that all art is? A carefully painted riddle? A riddle that leads to some cliched answer we already knew? Perhaps not. Perhaps there's more to it.
So what do I do?
The Departed is a 2006 American epic thriller film directed by Martin Scorsese and written by William Monahan.
She felt funny.
It is both a remake of the 2002 Hong Kong film Infernal Affairs and also loosely based on the real-life Boston Winter Hill Gang. The character Colin Sullivan is based on the corrupt FBI agent John Connolly, while the character Frank Costello is based on Irish-American gangster Whitey Bulger. Since the beginning, the movie revolves around the idea of death and the ones that die and what they leave behind. The fear of death and the fear settling in over the years leads people to do horrible things. The characters that have accepted their mortality are the ones that prevail in the end, in life or in death. Since the beginning of the movie, death follows Billy like a ticking clock. His mother dies, he joins Frank Costello and he sees death and sinks into an abyss and is unable to stop it. Billy's fear of his own mortality keeps him vigilant. He hangs on a fine thread, balancing himself so that he doesn't lose himself. Billy doesn't want to die. He hates Frank and his gang, and the most detrimental issue is that he is too powerless to do anything at all. He is just another gear in the machinations of bureaucracy. Billy is constantly on the edge of breaking down mentally. However, something changes inside him eventually.
I mean, he murdered somebody, right? The guy fucking murdered somebody and you don't fucking take him.
At 344 wash, Captain Quinnan accepts that he is gonna die as he sacrifices himself for Billy. Billy knew he had died soon as well, and that's why he entrusts the evidence with Madison, who eventually sends it to Dignam. After Quinnan dies, Dignam is suspended for causing workplace violence. As Billy accepts his mortality, he transcends himself. Billy starts out as a cop, trying to rise above the filth he was raised in, and he soon learns that serving the Commonwealth is a complicated and often dirty business. He is sent to a prison and made to start from the very institution that contradicts everything he believes in. There's a theme of death and resurrection with Billy. He naively steps into the world with a positive intent, but he is sent to hell, literally a place that houses sinners, and then he is made to live amongst them, bear witness to their sins until he realizes that death is perhaps not such a bad thing. It could be worse. He could be like Frank or Sullivan.
What could I use you for?
People who let others die because of their greed and callousness, and most importantly the inability to accept their own mortality. When Dignam tells Billy that he is his best friend, he is right. Dignam is the only one who isn't sugarcoating things for Billy. Captain Quinnan and he aren't leading him into an illusion or a fantasy.
We have a question. Do you want to be a cop, or do you want to appear to be a cop? It's an honest question. A lot of guys want to appear to be cops. Gun, badge, pretend they're on TV.
Sullivan is that cop, pretending he is on TV. He's making quips at a crime scene and living his fantasy of an officer romance by often harassing his colleagues, until he starts going out with Madison. Only by accepting his mortality, Billy transcends death. He even says he couldn't care about the bagpipes or the medals, yet he is the one who deservingly gets the honor. Billy doesn't die in vain. He leaves behind love and a better world for his child. Sullivan and Frank do die in vain. Frank never had anything. He was an FBI informant, and Sullivan was working for an FBI informant as a mole in the police department. This doesn't make any sense, and rightfully so. These people have dug a senseless hole for themselves and they have no idea what to do. Their life's purpose is fulfilled by meaningless quest for lust and illusion of order and drugs. And when they die, they leave behind nothing. And perhaps it is true that it is the system that's corrupted. In the system and the bureaucracy that ruins the lives of honorable men like Billy and his father and Captain Quinnan. And perhaps one should step aside and take things into their own hands. But that's the thing, isn't it? That's what Travis Bickle thought. That's what Frank Costello thought. These are justifications for evil, and that's how the wise guys justify their organization.
And all they got from Paulie was protection from other guys looking to rip them off. And that's what it's all about. That's what the FBI could never understand. That what Paulie and the organization does is offer protection for people who can't go to the cops. That's it. That's all it is. They're like the police department for wise guys.
Martin Scorsese grew up in a rough neighborhood of Little Italy and Bronx, and his parents were both part-time actors. As a child, Martin couldn't go outside or play with other kids on account of his asthma, so his parents took him to movie theaters. Martin Scorsese's upbringing and his environment were the domain for his cinematic endeavors. His movies deals a lot with metaphysical death and rebirth and characters often failing in their growth, but The Departed is one such movie where Martin Scorsese lays out his fundamental ideas as clearly as one can, and he lets the protagonist win, even in death. The Departed is to Martin Scorsese what The Prestige is to Christopher Nolan. Perhaps Martin Scorsese understood death because of his asthma, or perhaps he was a secret witness to a whacking, or perhaps it was his prior ambitions of becoming a priest. Whatever it was, it probably led to a profound development. In our George R.R. Martin video, we discussed how a sophisticated and proper transversal through darkness leads to light, and that has always been a key theme in Martin Scorsese's movies. In Martin Scorsese's movies, shown as a contradiction to how his protagonists end up. His dark, detailed, complex, and often disturbing movies, if watched properly, convey a hopeful message. And perhaps that's what art is. It isn't what Martin Scorsese says, it's how he says it. He takes you for a ride, and by the end, he doesn't have to spoon-feed or enforce his ideals to you. For better or for worse, you understand the story and it changes you.